That's
All right.
okay.
Okay.
So this is I will first caveat out of the box. I have not ever taught a weaving class over Zoom before.
I've never taken one.
So bear with me if things go weird, okay? But so it's exciting to have all you here. I think actually the weaving class is probably going to go easier by Zoom than a knitting class would. So I'm excited to see how this goes. So the first thing I want to do is to kind of quickly go through and find out from all of you what kind of a loom you're using. We'll talk a little bit about the materials that you need and whether you have them on hand. And then I'll dig into some of the rest of it. So I'm just gonna call on people so that since you're in the order that you're in on my screen. So Jeannie, why don't you go first?
Me?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi. This could get confusing since there are two Jeannies here. So I have a floor loom. It's a 4-harness Maycomber, and has about a 24-inch weaving width on it.
Okay, perfect.
I'm not sure what you were looking for, but
basically just floor loom versus rigid heddle.
Okay, floor loom, 4-harness.
Okay, super.
Okay. Yeah.
Julie.
I have a rigid heddle. I think it's that wide. I think it's a 2-foot. I think it's a 2-foot rigid heddle.
Okay. Judith.
I'm going to use my table loom, which is 4-harness, and it's about 27 inches. Although I've never really gone all the way to 27, but
Yes, that's understandable. Diane.
I'm going to use a 20-inch rigid heddle loom.
Okay. And Elizabeth.
I am going to use a 22-inch table loom for heddle.
Okay, super. The reason I'm asking is because for the rigid heddle weavers, you'll be doing just obviously a plain weave as opposed to a twill. So everybody who's on a floor loom will be doing a twill. The pattern that I sent out, and did everybody get the email that I sent by way of the classes?
not yet.
Mine went to junk mail. I mean, my spam, but I found it there.
Okay, I'll take a look.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's so weird, especially Gmail. It's been like sending everything to junk mail, like from our NCFF address for some reason.
Right.
So
I got it.
Yeah, so I know a couple people did because they responded to the questions that I had in there. I didn't hear from anybody else, so I'm hoping you got it, because one of the things that's in there is the pattern for what we're doing today. I'll be talking about it and I'll show it to you as well, but if you can't find it and you don't have it, let me know. And then I'll make sure that I get it sent to you.
Jean, the other thing you can do is you can actually drop it into the chat on Zoom.
Then
Oh,
where
as
did
a
you go?
Word doc?
What's
yeah,
that?
just a document. If you've got a file, open
Oh,
up the
I
chat,
do have a file.
drop it in there, and then it should send to everybody who's here.
Okay.
Find it in the chat, so you'd open up the chat window and then be able
Yeah,
to
I've got the chat open. I just need to get to I've got so many things open. I need to get to my desktop. Oh, disk IO error. What does that mean? Retry. Oh, maybe it's because I have it open.
Yeah, probably.
Okay, hang on. Hang on, everybody. And I'll do a copy and paste instead. Maybe that'll help too. Come on. Okay, there it is. It worked that time.
Oh, yes, there it is. Got it.
Okay, and so hopefully people have Excel or at least a computer of some sort that will open that up. But I am going to open it. I'm going to screen share it after we talk a little bit more about just plaid patterns in general. So I want to share my screen here.
Okay, yeah, I see it now, Jeannie. It's upside down and backwards, but I'll figure it out.
Oh,
Since it's only numbers, I should be able to read it. Got it.
okay. So making sure I'm getting to the right stuff here. Okay, I'm going to share this one first because I want to just talk a little bit about, okay, here's what we're doing and here's what you're going to need for those of you who maybe haven't seen what was there. So basically what we're going to talk about is the sort of what a tartan pattern is. We'll talk some about the colors and how to make the colors do what you want them to do. We'll go through the pattern that I have for you that I just put into chat so that I'll make sure that all the pieces of it are clear. And then we'll talk about different kinds of questions you might have in terms of just the beginning part. I figured next week. So between this week and next week, what I'm hoping you can do is take the pattern and get your loom ready to weave. And then next week, we'll talk about the actual weaving part. So this is one of the reasons why actually having this divided up into 3 weeks actually makes a lot of sense, because we can do a piece this week, then you guys can do the part that you need to in terms of getting the stuff on your loom, and then we can talk about the weaving next week. Then you can weave, and then we can look at the final results of last week. So that's sort of my plan. So then we'll talk, and then so at the end of the class, we'll just have questions and we can talk about colors, and if you want to ask specifics about the kinds of colors that you have or whatever. So basically you'll need 4 skeins, and can everybody see this okay?
Mm-hmm.
So what you'll need is 4 skeins of contrasting color. How much you contrast them is kind of up to you. I tend to like wool for this first one. I'm working on one right now that's cotton. Cotton is not as easy to, with all the different changes of colors in the ends on a selvage, it's not as giving, I guess. I would say just pick colors that you like and that you think would make a nice tartan. Tartans there's a lot you can do with them. And they always, in this particular pattern that I'm doing, though, there's one color that is the more dominant color. And when we go through the pattern, I will show you which one that is. So you'll need 1 skein of that color, because that one, and since we're talking about worsted weight yarn, this pattern was designed using probably Cascade 220, but any worsted weight yarn will work. And so as long as you have 1 full skein of that main color, and then 3 skeins of, and then 3 other colors. And for one of the colors, you probably won't need all that much, but for the first one, you need a lot. A second color, you need quite a bit. One, you don't need a whole lot, but you want to have enough. And then the third one is somewhere in between. So for you people, you guys on the rigid heddle, you'll want to have a shuttle for each color. Otherwise, or you'll just be doing a lot of swapping things back and forth. Multi-shaft weavers, ideally you have a bobbin for each color. You don't necessarily need a shuttle for each color. It helps, however, to have 2 shuttles. Just because there's a couple of places in here where you can just set 1 shuttle aside and work with a second one. And I'll talk about that next week when we're starting to talk about the actual weaving part. Generally speaking, a 10 dent reed works fine with worsted weight. And so that's what you would be wanting to work at here. This particular project is 14 inches. It sounds like everybody's looms are ample to handle that part. So that's good. Any questions about what you need before we get going on that one? Okay. So the next thing I want to talk about, and let me make sure I'm getting to the right thing here. Okay, that's the pattern.
Yes,
Okay.
he is. He should be there. He should be there real soon.
Okay, and the other thing I will say is if you have any questions along the way, please stop me and just jump in with whatever they are, because if you have them, I suspect other people do too. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the pattern and tartans in general. So tartans as a rule are basically just stripes both ways. And there are, obviously you set up the stripes in the warp, and then when you're weaving it off, you weave off stripes that go basically trompe as writ in the same color and order as you did for the warp, which ends up making a very nice symmetrical design with stripes over stripes. And you've got some that end up being two-tone blocks, and you've got some that are solid tone blocks. And so as you're planning for your weaving, what you want to be thinking about is your dominant colors are basically going to be those ones that have the single tone blocks. Actually, before we let me show you a couple of other things first. Okay, so when you're talking about tartans, here's an example of one. So this is this was one of the pictures that was in the NCFF book. So as you can basically see, you've got a big solid block of purple, where you've got the purple, you're going to have a two-tone with green and purple, and then you've got a two-tone with white and purple. And essentially the only thing that's in this is the green, the purple, and actually it's a very light blue. So there's only three colors. But once you start getting stripes on type of stripes, it ends up looking like way more than that, because you've got green on blue, you've got blue on purple, you've got the purple on green. So and then you have the solids of both the green, the purple, and the white, or the light blue. So you can so tartans can be as simple or as sophisticated as you want. So that one had three colors. This one is another one. It has 4 colors. It has like a maroon, that's sort of the main color there. It's got black, it's got a light gray, and it's got white. One of the things when I designed this one that I didn't do a swatch first, the black on the maroon does not show up as well as you might like. So as I was weaving this off, I thought, you know, it probably would have been better to maybe have that be a light gray instead. And it would have made a more dramatic statement in there in that block. So this is one of those things that as you play with tartans, you figure out, okay, well, that was okay, but here's how it might have been better. So all of these really, it's just stripes on stripes. And designing tartans is a lot of fun, because you can just think about, okay, I want these colors together, and I want a big block of something here, and then I want little accent colors, or I want these other things. And tartans are really easy to do that with, because you can just pick and choose your colors and then pick and choose your stripes. Okay, so let's go back to the pattern. Any questions about that? So, and one of the things that I will give you the last week is there is a place on the Scottish Register of Tartans that you can actually sign up with them and do a search for tartans that you want to look at, and then it will send you the threading for those and the colors. So I found the Davidson tartan that way. I found a McNeil tartan that way. Harley Davidson has a tartan. So anyway, and there's a lot of, states and different kinds of places and some of them, like the Davidsons or the Stewarts, have different kinds of tartans. And you can see all of those and you can get their threading so that you can do it the way it is official if you want to. Okay.
Clan my mom belongs to has like 5 or 6.
What's that?
I said the clan my mom belongs to it has like 6 different tartans.
Oh yeah, because they have a formal, they have a working, they have a wedding, they have, yeah, a lot of them have.
The old one, the hunting.
Exactly, the ancient and then the new, yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. And actually the Davidson tartan is a little bit like that too. And I will say that this pattern that I'm using is actually sort of based on the Davidson tartan. If you reverse the blue and the green, you end up having the Davidson tartan. Okay, so I don't know how familiar you all are with working with patterns like out of hand woven or various kinds of places. But essentially you've got 2 essential things in this particular pattern. One is this block that's right here that has the color chart. And you can either use it as a chart or you can use it as having them all written out. They are essentially doing the same thing. And then you have your threading diagram that's down here, that the threading diagram is pretty much independent of the colors. So the color part is what you're really going to be paying attention to when you're winding your warp. And this is essentially telling you how many threads of each color do you need in what order. So for example, with this one, and these have nothing to do with what shafts these are going to be on. So for those of you who are weaving on 4 heddles, these are totally independent of what shaft anything will go on. The same thing will apply to rigid heddle weavers too, where it's just, you need 2 threads of red, then you need 12 of green, then you need 2 of blue, you need 2 of green, then you need 16 of blue, 2 of black. And you just work that all the way across until you get over here. The reason you have a 2 over here at the end is basically to balance out the 2 that's over here on this side. If you were repeating this multiple times, you would basically stop on this column right here and then start back over here as you're winding your warp. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then the last time through the pattern, you're going to add this extra 2 red ones just to balance things out so that it ends at the same place that it starts. If you order threadings from the Scottish Register of Tartans, they send them in something that looks more like this. Where basically it tells you need 2 reds, you need 12 greens, you need 2 blues, you need 2 greens, you need 16 blue and 2 black. And then this little slash over here means then once you get to that 2 red, that then you go backwards and you reverse from there. And in some cases, they'll end up having a slash over here on the left-hand side too, because you're basically reversing back and forth depending on how many times you repeat the pattern. Now, if I remember right, the actual Davidson tartan actually has twice as many of each of these in the official one. Normally, at least with Scottish tartans, usually the minimum you have is 4. So they're either usually in various sets of 4. Although they do have, you can be semi-official and cut everything in half. But the tartans will almost never have just 1 thread of any color. It will always be at least 2 and usually 4. Let's see. So questions about that part. I'll talk a little bit here about when you're winding your warp, what I do for changing colors. Generally speaking, what I do is I will wind the two threads. For example, with this red, I'll put on my floating selvage, which I almost always use a floating selvage. And for those of you on a rigid or on a multi-shaft loom, you will want a floating selvage, because with a 2-2 twill, you'll end up with little loose odds and ends with the twill. How many of you have used a floating selvage before?
Oh, I have.
Okay, so we'll talk about floating selvages too. I love floating selvages. I use them for everything because it really helps to make the selvage nice. Because you have basically an independent thread that you generally, when I'm weaving with a float, and we can talk about this more next week too, when we're actually looking at the weaving. With a floating selvage, you can go over it on one side and under it on the other side. And then when you do that coming the other way, you just have a nice figure 8 over and under your floating selvage that helps you keep everything nice and tight. And as some of you know, I'm all about tidy.
With your floating selvage, do you wind it on with your warp, or do you drop it behind with a weight?
I usually wind it on with my warp. And then usually what happens is it will loosen up, depending on how long my warp is, it loosens up a little bit. So what I usually do is just get some S hooks and fishing weights, and then weight it behind the back beam so that it keeps it tight. But I don't know, it's always just been easier for me just to wind it on with the rest of it. And I haven't usually had too much. The only time you end up is where you have problems is once your warp comes back over the back beam and you're getting toward the end.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily have a way to weight your floating selvages there.
Yeah.
Okay. Other questions? Are there questions about the color, how this color chart and or the alternate representation of the colors works?
No.
Okay. Now the thing is when you're warping, you're going to use the same color chart, and you're going to do it in exactly the same order with all the stuff, all of your weaving. So when you're weaving, you'll weave 2 picks of red, you'll weave 12 picks of green, 2 of blue, 2 of green, 16 of blue, 2 of black. So it's going to work. It's basically, it's a trompe-l'oeil with colors in the weaving, just like it is in the weft as it is for the warp. Okay, the threading diagram here is for those of you who are on a multiple shaft, with the 4 harnesses on your looms. And basically this is just a standard 2-2 twill sort of a thing, which is what traditional Scottish tartans are usually in a 2-2 twill. So this particular warp requires 138 ends. I will say when I do floating selvages, depending on how heavy my yarn is, I will sometimes do 2 through a single one as opposed to just 1. Mm-hmm. It tends to be a little bit stronger that way, and I don't have to worry about them breaking. And it also makes it easier when you're winding your warp. You can just do 1 extra all the way around and back. With a worsted weight yarn, you would only want to use 1 just because it's thick. So when you're winding this warp, for those of you who are using multiple shafts and using a floating selvage, do an extra red on this side and an extra red on that side. And it may be easier when you're winding it to wind both and then just let 1 fall off. And then just use 1. Okay, so basically you have 138 ends, 140 if you count your floating selvage on each side. As long as you, and I think I put on a 1.5 yard warp, which works pretty well because this project just actually makes a little short 2-foot sampler deal. So it's a short little project. It won't take a whole long time, and it doesn't take a huge amount of yarn either. Let's see. So if you wanted to do the math, basically with 105 yards, it requires 207 yards total for your warp. You could figure out percentage wise how many yards that is for each color. Based on the fact that, like for the red here, you only have 6 ends. So that doesn't take very much, and there will only be 6 ends or 6 picks per repeat for the red here too. So this is definitely the one that you don't need very much of. And then the green and the black in this particular case require about the same amount, and so probably about half of what you need for the blue. So the blue is the one that, in this particular instance, blue is the one that you really need to make sure you have enough of, because by the time you get your 1.5 yard warp and then do all your weaving, it will take the better part of a 220 yard skein. Okay, you'll set it at 10, and then it'll take up about 14.2 inches in your reed. So questions about that part? So in terms of changing colors, I'm going to stop my share for a minute so that I can show you what I do. So I'm gonna show you my warping board here, and I have sort of the beginning of a thing. I need to adjust it a little bit. My setup here is not ideal, but hopefully you can see this. So you guys can see my warping board?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so when I am warping, generally what I do is I start the beginning up here, and then I bring it down across, and then my cross is down here on this lower left-hand side. So when I'm measuring out my warp, I will take and I make all my color changes up here at this end, farthest away from the cross. And generally what I do is I just take I have my one color, then my second color, I will just cut this off, and I will add my new color and just tie a square knot up here. So when I get to the end, there's a whole potential row of knots up there. But generally speaking, sorry, I'm falling down here. So generally speaking, after I get done, there are knots all the way along that one where I have joined them, but they're going to be within the loom waist anyway, so you really don't have to worry about it. And I warp from front to back, and so I usually end up cutting that, and so I'm just going to send those all through, or they're going to end up at the end anyway. If you have like where you're only, if you have, and this is something that'll come up in the weaving as well. If you have one where, for instance, like with where you have the green and the blue, where you're going from the 12 green. Whoa, that's not what I wanted to do. So where you have 12 green, and then you have 2 blue, and then you have 2 more green, and then 16 more blue, rather than cutting those off where you're only going to be basically doing one down and back, you can just sort of let the green hang there for a little bit, do the two blues. Then when you get to the green, you put on those next two and then tie it off with the blue. Or just, you know, wind it off and let it be hanging there. So you don't always have to cut it if there's only just going to be a couple. And when you're weaving it, you'll do the same thing where you just kind of carry it along with selvage for a couple, so that you don't have, that reduces the bulk a little bit. I sometimes do it, I sometimes don't. Sometimes it's easier just to remember, oh yeah, okay, I got a new color, I'm going to cut it off and I'm going to tie a knot. Questions about that? That's probably what people are most concerned about, is, you know, sort of all those color changes. Does everybody know how to make a square knot?
As a Girl Scout, we learned.
What's that?
I was a Girl Scout, we learned.
Oh, yes. Okay, good. I know some people are better at knots than other people.
How do you make neat color changes in the weaving?
I will talk about that next week. It's really just a matter of cutting things off and
No.
how you I usually just tuck it in over a couple of things, and that's where the floating selvage really helps. Because then basically you just kind of wrap it around the floating selvage, and then it just kind of sits there.
And you trust it?
I do.
Oh no.
Actually, usually I have really never had a problem, even if when I bring my yarn back under, even if I'm only going under 2 or 3 threads, they always stay.
Trust the fiber, huh?
Yeah. Trust the fiber, trust the process.
We'll hope
It's
for the best.
sort of like when you're knitting and you do a steek, you know, people cutting, they don't like that either, but I do that all the time. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about colors. Do you guys have the colors that you're thinking about using?
Mhm. Yes.
So I'm totally unprepared. I've been doing Zoom troubleshooting. So tell me what colors to use. I think I was thinking of purple and teal, and I wonder where I got that.
Oh, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Actually, purple and teal would work really well. You might want, then if you had, you'd want an accent in there too.
Yeah,
So-
I was gonna use like a cream color, because I don't want it like too dark. But maybe cream and I don't know. The 4th color is beyond me right now.
Let's see, if you had, so is it a dark teal and a dark purple?
Yes.
So I would say you could go with something like a lavender and a cream. And I would probably, as far as the pattern goes, I would, of course, you know me, I would want to have the purple or the teal be the dominant colors.
Mhm, mhm.
So in my case, with this particular pattern, I would probably have the, let's see, I would probably have the blue be the purple and then the black or the green be the teal.
That's what I was thinking.
And then use the cream would probably be the second one, and then maybe the lavender is the red. Or some other, you could use maybe a lightish green, maybe that went with the teal would be another option. So what are other people thinking about?
Well, I have here deep rose. There it is. Okay. And then I have a burgundy.
Okay.
And this, I think, is grass green. And then this is old gold. I haven't decided, but I have an extra cone of this, the burgundy, so I think that'll be my main color. And the gold will be the one that has the less, perhaps, or the green will be. I'm not sure. And I did check these with the phone with the monotone to make sure that they're still distinct enough in terms.
Right.
Yeah, and they
Yeah.
are.
So for those of you who maybe don't know what Judith was talking about with checking the color with the monochrome on your phone, basically what that does is when you take your colors and then you move it and then you look at it through your phone's camera and you put it on basically on monochrome so that it's looking at it as black and white, you can see whether those things look the same or whether they are sufficiently different in value that they'll give you a change. So for example, with the tartan that I did with the red and the black, if I had looked at those under the monochrome, I probably would have seen that the burgundy and the black were too close to the same value and we're just going to blend together. But clearly I did not do that. I wanted the black in there for other purposes. And I was probably also working under, here's how much I have of each of these, because they were skeins of alpaca lace knitting yarn, which I do a lot of weaving with knitting yarns. So a lot of what drives my weaving sometimes is how much I have of any particular thing. So who else wants to share their colors and what they're thinking about?
I came up with these. I don't know if you can see them or not. I don't have a smartphone, so I can't do that chrome thing. But I do spend a lot of time looking. I've got a blue and a green, and I couldn't get black or red, so I have dark gray and a variegated gold. So we'll see if that works or not. But then this morning while I was moving fence, I was thinking, well, maybe the red and the gold with the gray and the tan might be interesting. So jury's out. I may have to play around with this.
Yeah, actually, I think any of those would work. I think for your first 4 sets or your first 4, there were a couple of those that were, I think the gray and the blue.
They're all dark. So
are pretty similar. So really what's going to pop out on that is the gold.
You would do what now?
The gold will pop out, and I mean the gold will make a great accent color.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
So part of it will depend on how close you want your blue, your essentially the equivalent of the black, blue, and green.
Right. And I do have the option of using a lighter blue. So when it comes time to wind the warp, maybe I'll go with the lighter blue instead of the darker blue. The darker blue is very similar to the green.
Yeah,
that may be very close in tone, and they may not show up distinctly when you cross them over, you know.
Right. So I might be better off with the lighter blue.
Well, so keeping in mind that, when I'm thinking about a tartan, what I will think about is a lot of times, so when I have this block of 12 greens, that means I'm going to have a 12 by 12 square of a solid green.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm going to have a little bit of a dividing line with the blue that will have red on one side and green on the other, where it's a 2-tone, right?
Uh-huh.
And then I'm going to have another little accent so these two actually sort of make just like little accents of a divide from one color to the next color.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're going to have a big block of blue. So your blue and your green are actually going to be separated by these 2 little stripes of one will be predominantly blue, one will be predominantly green.
Okay.
So in many ways, you can use colors that are fairly similar in value. It's just that these 2 little accent lines are going to be pretty similar because there will be the blue on the green and then the green on the blue, right? When you're weaving them off with green, this will be a solid green. This one will be a blue and green. Then when you're weaving with the blue, this will be a solid blue line, and this will be a 2-tone green and blue. Does that make sense?
Calls for a lot of sampling, doesn't it?
Well, another thing you can do is to get a Xerox machine or go to a Xerox machine, say in the library, and just Xerox your colors on black and white. And that will show value. And what you can also do is take a strand or two of one color and put it over the skein of the other and ditto the other way.
And
then
see if you
it will show
can
up.
distinguish the two.
Yeah.
The other thing that as you're winding your warp, you'll get a very good sense of, okay, this is what this is going to look like based on your warp will be beautiful when it's on the warping board. Because it's going to have all of it's going to have all of the stripes in exactly the width and the length of what it's going to look like on the loom as well. So you can tell whether, okay, yeah, this is going to give me a nice little, this is going to give me a nice little accent line, or, oh yeah, that's going to be kind of muddy when that goes across.
So you're saying we can edit while we're winding our warp if we need to?
You absolutely can, yes. Because the places where things might get a little bit muddied up, and again, that's like, with the one that I showed you where my black was very similar in value to the burgundy. It still looks good. It maybe doesn't look quite as good as it would have if I'd have had something a little more contrasty. But it also gives me a nice big block of burgundy, which I like. With this one, for your block of green, when you're weaving it off with green, you're gonna have a nice solid green on each side. And then over here is where you're gonna have the green on top of the blue. So you'll have a fairly large block here where you've got green and blue together. So that's where, if they're really similar in value, they may, potentially a lighter blue might work better just because it's going to give you a little bit more contrast.
Depends on which shade of teal we end up with, doesn't it?
Yes. So for example, if we look at this one, so we've got our big block of, and unfortunately my light's not great. Okay, so you've got your block of teal or your block of burgundy here that's a solid. But then because it goes this far, you've also got fairly large blocks of where you're looking at multicolor and different colors on each other.
Right.
These are the ones that you want to be thinking about in terms of how much contrast do you want there. And you can have as much or as little as you want. I mean, some people really like a little bit more subtle in terms of how sort of in your face is this. And having two different dark colors actually doesn't look, I mean, in this one, the purples and the greens, I mean, the green is probably a little bit brighter green than the purple is. But you end up with this green block here, and then you have a purple block down here. Then when you're dealing with the solid green, you've got a purple on green here. And so that's where you have to, that's where probably the best way to test your colors is to just string out some and twist them together and see if you like the effect of them twisted together, because that's going to be the closest to what you're going to see as they're crossing in the when you're weaving it off. And if it seems like, oh yeah, I can't distinguish those very well, I don't like it, obviously then don't use it and come up with a different plan. Does that make sense?
We can choose any colors we want, right? Even though there are registered tartans.
Yes, you can choose any colors you want. The only thing I will say is make sure when you're in your pattern, write down which colors you're substituting for which colors on that pattern so that you're consistent.
Good plan. Good idea.
Because otherwise, if you use the blue in one place and the green in another place, it's not going to come out the way you want. What other questions or concerns do you have before you start the endeavor of winding your warps?
Just to go back to something you said very early on, you said right now you're using cotton
Yes.
or tartan. What size cotton, and do you put 2 in a dent then, or what?
Actually, I'm using, this goes back to me saying I use a lot of knitting yarns. This is actually a worsted weight cotton.
Oh, okay.
I can show you the one I'm weaving right now. It was one I just had 3 skeins of Pima cotton that were worsted weight that I thought, oh, this might make a okay tartan. So my current tartan is right there.
Mhm.
So it's worsted weight. This one I have it where I have this one right here is a solid, but then the one that comes next is a little bit wider and it has a white in the middle of it. Unfortunately, they're all wound onto my fabric beam right now, so you can't see. They look more like this one where you've got sorry, my camera's out of whack, where you have just the one little accent right here.
Mhm.
My next block of red will have a white accent like that. So then it'll have a cross in the middle of it. Because that's a bulky cotton, it ends up making it, the selvages are a little bit tricky, but I can show you that too when we get there. When we talk about weaving next week. What other questions? So Diane, what color are you looking at?
Oops, where am I? Am I unmuted? I'm not sure. I'm okay,
Yeah,
right?
we can hear you.
Okay, I bought the ones in the pattern, but then I got white and gold, so I'm not sure. It's going to be more traditional colors though.
Okay.
Yep.
Good. Julie, what about yours?
So I thought I had pulled it out, but apparently not. So I pulled up my Ravelry stash because I was like looking at stuff, which then brought up a question actually, because I do have mostly knitting wool. Is there a particular not weight, the construction that you recommend for weaving as opposed to knitting with?
Oh, you mean like using a singles versus a multiple ply? You know, from my experience, you can probably weave with just about anything. I mean, I use a lot of lace weight yarn that is just, you know, your traditional knitting yarn that's just lace weight.
Mhm.
I haven't necessarily woven a lot with singles, other than I would suggest if you are using singles that they're probably better in the weft. Just because there's a little bit more abrasion that happens on all the warp yarns as as things are coming and going and, being raised and lowered and all that stuff. There's probably somewhat less of that happens with a rigid heddle. So you could probably get by with a rigid heddle using a singles.
Okay. Because I've got a few wools that are like there are a lot of little strands. And I just wasn't sure if that would be as sturdy, like you said. Like a single is like usually really fluffy and doesn't have like the strength that a different ply would.
Yeah, I generally use multiple ply yarn, but you know, like this, actually both of these tartans that I showed you that I made are made out of Cascade baby alpaca. They're
Okay,
knitting yarns, and so they're just a 2-ply.
okay, okay.
And they work
Yep.
fine. You just have to make sure that when you're tensioning it, you don't tension it super strong.
Mhm.
And usually when I have yarns that maybe are a little not as strong, when I use them as a floating selvage, I will usually do them. I will put 2 strands along the edge instead of just 1.
Okay.
So floating selvages, just so you all are, when you're putting your warp together, you'll need to take into account the floating selvage. Basically, I know Judith, you've worked with a floating selvage before. Have the others of you dealt with a floating selvage?
Yes.
Nope.
A little bit.
I'm a
I
pretty
did one
beginner,
accidentally once.
so.
Yeah. What were you gonna say, Julie?
Oh, I just said I'm a very beginner weaver, but this is one of the things I've always wanted to weave because I've been to a lot of Scottish events and I love tartans.
So with a rigid heddle, basically, since you're doing a plain weave, the floating selvage is a little bit less critical, but if you wanted to do one, just so you could see how it works,
Mhm.
basically what you'll do is you'll just do 1 extra thread on each side.
Okay.
And you want it so that it, although I don't know with a rigid heddle loom, I'm not sure whether you can do it or not, because basically it will not be in a dent. I mean, it'll be in the reed, but it won't be in a heddle at all. It just kind of floats along in a neutral position on each
Gotcha.
side of the loom. And
Okay.
essentially what it does is it gives you a place to anchor things as you're coming and going in and out when you're weaving it.
Gotcha.
So with a rigid heddle, I'm not sure there's a way to have one that's not in a dent or not in a heddle, is there? I don't do rigid heddle weaving, so that's a.
If it was
I
in a
don't-
long slot, it should be able to go up or down as you need it to. If it's not in the hole, the reed is slots and holes.
Right.
Yeah.
In the long slot, it should have enough play in it to go where you need it to go. And if it's plain weave, it's not that big a deal anyway, is it? Because I mean,
No, for plain weave, it doesn't really make a whole lot of difference whether you have a
yeah,
floating selvage or not.
yeah.
Other than as you're doing your color changes and what to do with the the end of one color and the beginning of the next color.
There you go. So,
And floating selvages work well for that, for being able to help wrangle all those ends.
yeah.
Any other questions I can answer before I turn you all loose to wind your warp and get your looms ready for next week?
So you want us to get our looms warped so we're ready to weave, and then you will instruct us on how we should do it right, right?
Yeah, well, as yes, I will tell you what I do, whether that's right
you
or not
go.
is another story.
That's excellent. Perfect. Okay.
All right, well, it looks to me like everybody has good colors to work with. You can, like I said, you can kind of play around as you're winding your warp. If you don't like the way the stripes are looking, you can always take them off and rewind with different colors. And if you're not sure about the contrast between two, you just take a little bit apart and wind them to, do like a ply together to make them into a barber pole and see whether you like what that barber pole looks like. And if you don't like it, don't do it and pick something else. I generally am a fan of more contrast rather than less. So that just but that's frequently that's my go-to when I'm knitting too. More contrast is better. All right. So I think you guys are ready. You've got your pattern ready to roll. And I think you should all probably have my email address too. So if you have questions that come up, don't hesitate you can just send me an email and I'll see if I can help in whatever way you need between now and next Sunday.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jean.
You bet.
That's good.
I'll see you guys all next week.
Okay.
All right.
Look
Thanks.
forward to it.
Bye.
Yes, bye.